Eighth graders, we're going to talk about syntactical terms today, otherwise known as syntactical devices. These are words that sound very complicated. A lot of them sound like some crazy illness that you don't want to contract, but they're very effective when used in speeches, especially persuasive speeches. And so because you're going to be writing a speech in the very near future, these are some of the devices that you need to know how to use and understand why you might be expected to use these. Some of these you're familiar with. You've seen them before. You just didn't know that they had these particular names to go along with them. So everybody in the class should receive a page that looks like this. It says syntactical terms at the top. It has the word syntax. And then it has a lot of different devices. In fact, there are 10 that we'll be going over in the next few minutes. So, in order to understand what all of these are, you need to know that syntax is basically just the way that words are ordered in a particular sentence. So it's really just all about the sentence structure. So syntax is also known as sentence structure. What I would really like to see you doing is that you're not only making notes on this particular page, but you're also taking some of your own notes in your composition book. So I'm going to be going back and forth. So if I write it down, it's probably because it's important enough for you to write down as well. Also, I'm not going in this particular order. I feel like this is very hodgepodge, mishmash. It just doesn't really work in this order for me. So I'm going to put it together where I think that it will be a little bit more effective for you. So the very first device that we're going to talk about is one called Anaphora. So I'm just going to go over here and just kind of number off each one. So I'm not going to give you everything that you need to know about it. This is just kind of a brief rundown. So I'm going to give you the name of it. I'm going to tell you what the device does and maybe give you an example or two. We will be going over this more in depth in class, especially with you creating some specific, mnemonic devices, some type of some way that you can help the rest of your classmates remember what these words are. So anaphora, this is something that Martin Luther King was very fond of using in his speeches. A lot of authors tend to use these. In fact, Dr. Seuss from Green Eggs and Ham used this particular device. So anaphora is basically when each part of a sentence begins the same way. So each part begins the same way. And it doesn't necessarily have to be just a sentence. It could be that every paragraph in a particular text begins the same way. So it's usually at least the first one or two words that are repeated there. So this is just a fancy type of repetition. Each part begins the same way. Again, this is called anaphora. Okay, so for example, would you like them in a house? Would you like them with a mouse? Would you like them here or there? Would you like them anywhere? And that's from Green Eggs and Ham, Dr. Seuss. The would you like them, would you like them, would you like them, would you like them. That's the anaphora part of it. It's just simple repetition at the beginning of sentences or paragraphs. Okay, so anaphora. The word that kind of means the opposite of anaphora is something called epistrophe. So if it's basically the opposite of it, epistrophe is where each part ends the same way. So anaphora begins, epistrophe ends. So each part ends the same way. And an example for epistrophe would be something like I scream, you scream, we all scream, or ice cream. And so even though you have for ice cream at the very end of that, it's still, each part is pretty much ending that same way. So I scream, you scream, we all scream. All right, scream is the last part of that. That's the epistrophe part. Okay, so the next one we're going to look at is number 3. Let's do asyndeton. Make sure you're spelling these words correctly. That is pretty important that you know how to spell and pronounce them both. So asyndeton is when there is something intentionally left out so that you can get some audience feedback. If you leave it out but the audience can infer what should be there, what would have been there, you already have the audience interacting with you. And so if they can play an active role in what you're saying, more power to you. So the part that's really specifically left out of asyndeton is a conjunction. So it is intentionally leaving out one of those fanboys. Alright, so a to 10, you're leaving out a fanboy on purpose. So you don't use a conjunction where it normally should be used. The one that is the opposite of a to 10, and you'll find that a lot of these kind of go back and forth. They're partners in crime. So anaphora and epistrophe go together. A to 10 and poly to 10 go together. So you know that a means not or against. You know that poly means multiple. So you can already infer what poly to 10 probably is going to involve, just because you're that smart. Alright, so if we leave out a fanboy for a to 10, we're going to have extra fanboys for poly to 10. So intentionally adding extra. So instead of saying I'm going to the store to buy milk, eggs, bread, in poly to 10 you would say I'm going to the store to buy milk and eggs and bread and bubblegum ice cream, because you really want to get across your point of how much it is you're having to do. So intentionally adding extra conjunctions. So extra fanboys. Alright, so that's anaphora is when each part begins the same way. Epistrophe is when each part ends the same way. A to 10 is leaving out a fanboy, and poly to 10 is intentionally adding an extra fanboy or two. Okay, so the next one I want to talk over with you, number 5. Let's talk about, trying to decide how I want to do this. Let's do ellipsis, because that kind of goes along with those guys too. So ellipsis. Okay, so this sounds a lot like something you already know. So you know the ellipses is the ... to indicate there's a pause or there's something left out or just going to kind of trail off your thought. This is different. Ellipsis is when you actually leave out just a word. This is very, very much like a to 10. Instead of leaving out a fanboy, though, you're just leaving out some other word that the audience could fill in the blank for. So this, again, is all about the audience interaction. So this is where you leave out a word, or it could be more than one word. It could be a word that the audience can infer. Okay, so that's ellipsis, and it's very much like a to 10. It's just that a to 10 is leaving out a fanboy. Ellipsis is leaving out something else that the audience could still fill in its place. All right, so next on our list is number 6. So we're halfway through. You haven't died yet of any of these nasty, contagious words, so I think you're probably good. All right, number 6. Let's talk about antithesis. Antithesis. Sound like they're getting more and more complicated, huh? Antithesis is one that I really like because I like to repeat myself, and this one's all about that. This is one where each part of your sentence or each part of your paragraph begins and ends the very same way. So if you are familiar with that song called Glad You Came, it is full of antithesis. So if you'll go listen to that right now, you will see a very good example of what antithesis should look and sound like. So this is where each part ends and then it begins the same way. So the end of one sentence and the beginning of the next sentence, or the end of one part of a sentence and the beginning of the next part of the sentence, so with commas, is going to be the same thing. Begins the same way. So go listen to Glad You Came, see what I'm talking about. Alright, number 6. This one is Effing Ellipsis. Effing Ellipsis. Okay, Effing Ellipsis is very, very much like antithesis, but in this case, each sentence begins and ends the same way. So this is where you have the ending and then the beginning. This one is where you have the beginning and the ending, okay? So this one is like, okay, so you have your sentence, boom, here it ends, and then here's where the next one begins, and then it continues. This is where basically, this is where this one begins, and then it ends that same way. So it's going to look a little bit different from this one here, okay? And they sound a little bit different, and you use them for different reasons. So we'll talk about that later. But basically, what for now, you need to know that the sentence begins and ends the same way. So that is Effing Ellipsis. So this one could be very much like in Forrest Gump, if you have watched the very beginning of that, where it starts off with him on a park bench, and there is this white feather that kind of floats around in the sky. And then at the very end of the movie, that feather kind of comes back. This is also like The Outsiders, where it's kind of a circular plot, where it begins at the movie house and then it ends full circle back at the movie house. Okay, so that's Effing Ellipsis for you. 3 more, almost done. Number 8. This one is, let's talk about anti-metable. Anti-metable. Got it? This is almost like a mirror image. This is when your ideas are flipped. So, for example, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. So you have the same ideas basically twice. It's just kind of a mirror reverse of it. It's like the Stanley yelled ats and holes. Okay, so I'm just going to put that this is kind of like a mirror image where your ideas are flipped. So if we were talking rhyme scheme and poetry, it would kind of be like the A, B, B, A. So again, if you were to hold up a mirror here, this is kind of what you would see the reflections be. Okay, so that's anti-metable. And you know, anti means opposite. So that's why they're flipped. Number 9 also involves anti. So this is antithesis. You will hear some people call it antithesis, but it really is pronounced antithesis. So a thesis is an idea, and anything anti is the against. So this is when you have opposing ideas that are right next to one another. So opposing ideas next to one another. So this one is going to be kind of like, I did not come to abolish, but I came to fulfill. So abolish is to get rid of, fulfill is to make good on. And so that's when you have something that kind of, it's almost like an oxymoron of sorts. They just, they're too opposite to really work together, but somehow it sounds pretty cool when you put them next to one another. So it's kind of like your black and white. All right, and your very last one that we're going to talk about today, and it's a good thing because my marker is about out. It's tired like me. Parallelism. We talked about this in class last year, and it's when basically you want each part of your sentence to be very much the same length and very similar to one another. Just think about parallel parking out on the street. You know how the parallel parking lines go? And so this is a whole lot like that. So this is if you, let's just say it's when each part of your sentence or paragraph is very similar in length. So that's when you could basically go through here and you could divide it up and it would be very parallel, just very much like parallel parking. Okay, so when you read it, it sounds like you could almost take a metronome to it. It's going to have a certain rhythm because you could break out each part just boom, boom, boom. All right, So these are all syntactical devices. You will be expected to understand these, know how to use them, because you will be writing a speech very soon in which you will have to include some of these. So what I would like to see everyone do now is to kind of look back at each of these examples that have been given on here. Look back at the notes that you have just taken. Go listen to that song, Glad You Came, because that's really the best way to understand that one. And what you need to be doing is start thinking about, how can I learn this the best? How can I remember it? I want everybody to try to come up with some type of mnemonic device, some type of handy-dandy little trick, some kind of a song, just something so that you can start learning these. All right, so that's your task right now. Go forth and conquer these syntactical devices.